I was unable to assimilate and digest the grief, the upset, the rage, the anger, the devastation. I had shut down and gone into a freeze state where my cellular energy had slowed and my body was naturally not prioritizing digestion because it was trying to focus on surviving because it felt in danger and under threat most of the time. Welcome to the Embodied Woman podcast with me, Rebecca Wilson. If you believe that fertile energy, creative power, and embodied, resourced, nourished women will change the world, then you are in the right place. This is a space to support you to arrive deeper into relationship with yourself and your body, to explore the multifaceted experience of womanhood. It is my mission to guide women back into connection with their natural essence, to become the living embodiment of their true nature. Are you ready to join a community of women who are taking responsibility for our lives, our energy, women who are centered and rooted in ourselves, connected to our womb space, and deeply nourished on a cellular level? If so, let's begin into this week's episode. Welcome to the community, my love. Hello, my love. Welcome to the Embodied Woman podcast. It's so good to have you here and be together in this way. Today's episode, I wanted to share a little bit of my own personal journey that I've been traversing through for some time. So if you've been here in my world for some time, you've probably heard snippets of this before. But I really wanted to share from a different view and lens my journey of moving out of survival through this pathway of cellular nourishment and remineralization. So first of all, I like to rewind time a little bit and recognize that my relationship with nourishment shifted quite dramatically around the age of 19. I think a little bit before that, around 17, and that was when my mother was diagnosed with leukemia. It was a very, very stressful time. She was very unwell, and we were just navigating as a family those kind of peaks and troughs of taking care of somebody that was unwell. By the time I had turned 19, my mum had moved through many different medications and forms of support, and eventually, unfortunately, she passed away. This was a really pivotal time, as you can imagine, in my life as, a teenage girl, journeying through teenage years into adulthood. And it was a very challenging time with lots of mixed emotions and lack of understanding and lack of support at that time in the world and in my life. Within this time, I adopted many disordered patterns with food, which were really born from a place of trying to control my emotions through this huge loss that I'd experienced in my life. I had lost my mother, a mother's love. My world had kind of been shaken upside down. And as a way of trying to control that situation, which was completely controlless, of course, I was in the illusion of trying to control. I adopted these controlling patterns around food and nourishment. And I'd actually stepped into these patterns of kind of denying myself nourishment. And I very much recognize that now, many years later, as kind of this form of losing this source of nourishment in my life, and then mimicking that or mirroring that in many other aspects of my life, relationally, in friendships, but particularly around the nourishment of and sustenance of food. This led to many challenging years of disordered food patterns and eating. And alongside this kind of patterning that was playing out, I was also experiencing a lot of physical pain when I was eating food. For many years, I experienced intolerances, sensitivities. I was unable to digest a vast amount of different foods. I wasn't able to process certain foods. I would be in a lot of physical pain in my belly and my digestive system if I ate certain foods. And some of those foods are kind of those known foods that people generally have those experiences with. And some of them were totally random and kind of unheard of that they would give this kind of sign or symptom. This kind of played into this pattern for me of choosing to cut out lots of different foods and food groups and led me down this path of kind of existing on very little. I became deeply undernourished and depleted and stressed on a cellular level. I was very dysregulated in my nervous system, definitely disembodied and out of balance. And so these kind of two things that were playing out side by side, they kind of fed into each other. But the root cause of both of these was the emotional distress that I was experiencing. You know, I now recognize with the wisdom that I have now and the years of learnings and understandings that, you know, I was unable to stomach and unable to digest and process this huge shock that had happened in my life. I was unable to kind of assimilate and digest the grief, the upset, the rage, the anger, the devastation. And so that was playing out in my physical body as these aches and pains and inabilities to digest foods and discomforts. I had kind of shut down and gone into a freeze state where, you know, my cellular energy had slowed and I was in a survival mode. And my body was naturally not prioritizing digestion because it was trying to focus on surviving because it felt in danger and under threat most of the time. I began to recognize back then a little bit, but obviously hindsight and age and moving through things is a beautiful thing. And I can see now with more clarity that I became very much addicted to the feeling of hunger and the feeling of stress, more so that would create in my physiology and my body. I was almost gaining like a high or a thrill or kind of that addictive hit when I was consuming very little food. My body was clearly in a state of disharmony. You know, I was unbalanced, dysregulated, in a state of survival. And I began to become very proud of how little I could eat and survive. It's a story that I hear from many women that I support now in my work and in my space. This, that I'm not hungry, I don't need to eat a lot, I don't have an appetite, or I didn't think I could eat that much, or, you know, for me, it was like trying to eat less and less. Many years later, I really woke up to the realization that, you know, I was able to survive off very little. And this became quite a strong theme and pattern that played out in my life, in my relationships, in my friendships, in my work, in abundance. This idea of needing very little, overgiving, oversharing, overfunctioning in most, if not all of my relationships, this constant pouring out, but very rarely pouring back into myself or allowing myself to receive from others, whether that be emotional support, you know, physical support, offering to cook me food or anything like that. There was this real block on receptivity and receiving and this kind of one-way track of constantly pouring out. Just like my physiological processes, my body was constantly pouring out energy to do its bare minimum with its functions without getting anything poured back in. So, you know, the reciprocity loop was very much broken and it was a one-way street or stream in all areas and facets of life. And this lasted in varying degrees for many years until, you know, life shifts and changes you. And I found myself in a different space in life where I was definitely eating more food and nourishing myself in better ways. But I would still live within some spaces of restriction, or I shouldn't have this, or I'm not allowed that. and I still experienced many different food intolerances and sensitivities. I had very strong and big histamine reactions to food, to environments, to animals, to certain smells. I would have very, very, very strong histamine responses as my body was so deeply stressed. And that was the way of my body trying to communicate with me that we felt under threat and in danger, and we needed to defend or attack from this external stressor. So with that, I spent quite a few years after that still having to, cut back or not have certain foods in order to not kick off that response in my body. And then as life passed me by and I moved through many of the emotional challenges that, this big loss brought me through therapy and, yoga and meditation and resourcing practices and the many different trainings that I've taken and teachers that I've sat with, I began to naturally move through those more challenging aspects of grief into a place of more calm and ease inside of myself. And this led me along the journey of having this full body realization. I like to call it a cellular awakening began. And it was a really deep call inside from my body that I needed to nourish myself in new ways, in ways that I had never before. And I didn't really know what that might look like, but I just had a feeling. I just could not carry on living in a state of stress, in a state of depletion. It's like my body had said enough. And I really felt like, I pushed her to the edge, the brink for her to finally kind of, scream that from within. And it's quite interesting how resilient the body is and just how far we can kind of take ourselves before, that kind of full body depletion kicks in. And this was probably about 4 years ago that I truly began to look at how I'm nourishing myself through a lot of different series of events in my life, which are definitely not all going to fit in this episode of this podcast. So maybe there's another one for that. But through life experiences, different breakdowns of relationships, new relationships forming, new pieces of information and educating myself in different ways, I began to recognize that maybe I needed to take care of myself differently. That being undernourished was not a badge of honor and was not something to be celebrated or applauded. And in fact, the complete opposite. It was not responsible. It definitely was not being in my power or my sovereignty or my full womanhood. I very much felt in those chapters and seasons of my life that I was in my little girl energy, that kind of wounded maiden. I wanted to be saved or rescued or someone else to take care of me. And through my healing journey, I grew and matured into the knowing and the realization that, I'm an adult now and no one's coming to save me. It's my job to tend to and take care of myself, to nourish myself deeply. And that is the deepest form of respect and self-love and honor that I can give to myself and my body. So I began on this journey of honoring and loving myself that deeply, that I would, pour all of the nourishment I could into every cell of my body. Alongside, this ever unfolding journey of somatic awareness, embodiment practices, meditation, movement, time in nature, all of those tools that I have in my kit. And I'm sure, many of you listening have your own tool boxes too. Many of the different modalities that I use with the women in my containers now. And I also began this kind of journey of remineralization and renourishing my body. And it was a slow and gentle journey that has taken place and unfolded over, a good chunk of time in the more recent years, adopting the RCP, which is the root cause protocol, which is another modality that I guide women through on the remineralization of their body. But before I had started on that, I had already begun a journey of adopting new ways of eating, ancestral diets, reintroducing more carbs into my food and more fats, having really kind of mineral rich fruits and vegetables. And even when I was stuck in patterns of disordered eating, I was always quite conscious around health and wellness. So I always ate healthy food, but possibly not enough of it. And I would try to avoid things like fat and carbohydrates, which of course are essential for our bodies. So the reintroduction of those was a very exciting and yummy time for me and my body, and they were greatly, greatly received. And this really took me on this journey of returning into cellular harmony. It's really allowed me to bring back some balance and a sense of ease in my system that I possibly haven't felt for, a really long time. Even at times where I would feel calm or relaxed, there would be an underlying sense of unease, a slight pattern or pull of dysregulation that might just echo, deep inside in my nervous system. And I kind of recognize now, well, of course, if I was undernourished and not eating enough, my body was in a state of survival most of the time. And so I took my body out of survival by nourishing myself fully and deeply. It's guided me on a pathway of connection and most deeply for me, a feeling of safety, which has been anchored in my own body. I have experienced many shifts within my hormonal levels and balances, and my energy, my vitality, and outside of my physical, my emotions are more balanced and regulated, as is my nervous system, much more resourced and resilient. And beyond that, my relationships are more grounded. My work is shared with more ease. I have greater clarity and creativity within that aspect and space of my life. I have been able to restore my metabolism and my body's ability to process food. I no longer have any digestive complaints or issues. I'm able to eat all of the foods that I at one time could not eat. I enjoy, foods that generally cause histamine reactions. I couldn't eat dairy for a very long time, and now I can have raw milk and yogurt and kefir and butter, which I'm very happy about. I can also tolerate some gluten through some sourdough and any bread that we make at home. And this journey of re-nourishing and re-mineralizing my body, most of all, has really allowed me to find this place of steadiness within. And, it hasn't been an overnight thing for me. It was a journey and something that I still continue to guide myself along. I recognize and know when my body is under stress, what it may need, what different minerals I need to up, what kinds of foods I need to eat, or maybe, what foods I don't tolerate best under stress. When life, does its thing and the waves of things come because they do, because that's this human experience. I know my body better and I know what I need and what I don't need in order to feel supported, safe, nourished. And this has been the kind of driving force, the inspiration really for the work that I have been sharing over this past year or so, and will continue to do so into the future, and guiding women in this multifaceted way. So approaching our healing and our restoration from all angles and facets of our being, the spiritual and the emotional, the physical, the mental, it's all needed to be approached because there's so many different parts of us, so many different facets of us. And when we kind of focus on one particular area, we can often leave other parts behind. So traversing this journey of somatic embodiment, movement, meditation, kind of deep understanding of your emotional and energetic body, alongside remineralization, renourishing, repatterning the nervous system, cultivating deeper safety, better understanding patterns, imprints, thoughts, the stories of our lives and what they mean, what we've made them mean, really gives us this full spectrum of understanding so we can really know ourselves deeply. And I believe that it is from that place of knowing ourselves that deeply that we are better able to make the shifts that we want to make in our lives. So we can show up as the full embodied versions of ourselves, to be rooted, resourced, find our way back to regulation with ease, and be more available to live life in its entirety. And that really is my desire, to support other women on that journey back into themselves, because it's a pathway that I've walked deeply and intricately over a sustained period of time. And I truly know what transformation is available should we say yes and choose that for ourselves. So that's just a short snippet of a season and a chapter in my life. Thank you for listening and being here. If you are feeling that call to step into deeper, greater resource within, I'll pop the details for my one-to-one individual mentorships in the show notes of this episode. You can journey in that space through the Awakening Woman mentorship or through the Conscious Conception journey, whichever stage or season of life you are in, whether you want to re-nourish and remineralize for yourself, for your body, for your hormones, for your fertility. It's all truly available. So the details of that are in the show notes, but I just would like to extend a thank you for being here, for being part of our community, and for just sharing your time in this episode. Have a beautiful day. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. If you loved this episode, please share it far and wide with your sisterhood and community. You can dive deep into all of my offerings via rebecca-wilson.com. Links to all offerings are below in the show notes of this episode. If you would love to support the podcast, please like, subscribe, download, and share the episodes so my work and this message can reach more women around the world. Remember, my love, you are here to live a life fully, deeply inhabiting your body and your divine nature. I am here to show you how. Hey love, I'm dropping in here to welcome you to join us in our online community membership, The Village. I created this space for women to gather, to return to themselves, to deepen the connection and the relationship with self, whilst held in a community of like-minded women walking the journey and the path of their own awakening.